Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Skaven Legendary Lords in Total War Warhammer 3, and I'm going to be ranking all 6 of them. The free non-DLC ones and the free DLC ones. But first we need to talk about Skaven and where they stand in Total War Warhammer 3. To understand what is going to make these lords, one way or another, rank on this list, because there are certainly some things that do matter far more for Skaven than others. So Skaven are a race that I would describe as a grower race faction, if you will. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that they start incredibly weak, with their baseline units being Skaven slaves, which are, in my view, the worst units in the entire game. The worst tier 1 units, the worst units overall in the game. The whole idea of Skaven slaves is that you're supposed to mass them in very large numbers, but ultimately you get a unit that in many ways is even worse than zombies. I mean, zombies don't have combat potential, but zombies will not break so easily. Skaven slaves will break. However, despite the fact that they have incredibly weak early game units, and clan rats, which you can get from basic barracks, aren't that much better, they do have very strong long-term potential. There's nothing quite like a nuclear weapon from Ikkit Claw, or a firing line of Warplock Jezzails, or Rattling Gunners, or a combination of them, along with Plague Claw catapults, or a melee possibility of Doom Wheels, Ogres, Rat Ogres, Hell Pit Abominations, and the like. So there is a lot of end-game potential. They have good late-game infantry in all respects. They have good ranged units, they have good monster units, they have really good artillery, but they need to grow. And this ties hand in hand with how their economy works. The vast majority of factions have 1 or 2 structures that generates income for them. Skaven don't work like that. Skaven rely on a series of structures, each of which generates less income than other races might do, unless you're talking about the Demon Prince, but added up together, built in a province, built in a region, and in a province, coupled with a structure in a provincial capital that boosts income up to 50% of all structures within that province, Skaven do have a lot of potential, economically, growth-wise. On top of that, they do have another advantage. Whenever they take a settlement, though this is a double-edged sword, but whenever they attack a settlement, win the battle, they can occupy, but their occupation works different. The level of the settlement doesn't matter, because it's always going to be level 1, unless you invest food for it to be a higher level. By the way, an added benefit to this is that you can sack a settlement, then occupy. You won't get the casualty replenishment, you'll get less money, however. But you can use food to boost the level of settlement. You don't need to, but you can gain some incredible benefits by doing so. Like, let's say you have a lot of food surplus, you go into a province, you can take it over and make the minor settlements a level 3, make the provincial capital a level 5 or 4, or make the minor settlements level 2, make the provincial capital level 4. That's probably what I'd go for, by and large, just use the growth to some extent, because if you start at level 5, it's going to take a while to get all the advantages, and you're spending a lot of food right from the start to get that to level 5. But I digress. The point is, the Skaven are a faction that can grow to be potentially strong. The problem is weak early game units, and they do need a lot of control in the provinces they have in order to really make them work. Be it control, growth, economy, all of those things together. So Skaven, more so than many other factions, do need provincial control, and they also need to have a large empire. If they can get that, they can become unstoppable. But it's getting that, especially in some legendary lords, that can be an issue for them. Now, coming in last place to begin this list is Tretch Craventail, and number 6, the worst legendary lord for the Skaven, and one of the worst legendary lords in the entire game. I have said that before, and I stand by that sentiment. But why is that? Well, a good legendary lord will either be an incredible combatant, or a powerful mage, or will give significant faction benefits. Some of the best give all of those together, or at least 2 of those together. But Tretch just doesn't have that. His faction-wide benefits are to give encourage to Storm Vermin. Okay, that's a leadership benefit. That's pretty nice, because you can have some Storm Vermin buffing clan rats in a melee, or Skaven slaves can encourage them to fight more. And Skaven do absolutely have a leadership issue. It is a major problem that they do have. Okay, so that's a decent enough buff. For control, whenever you break a diplomatic treaty, that's a mediocre bonus to say the least. Because although it does last for 10 turns and it is a decent amount of control, building a game around the idea of breaking treaties is just going to piss off the AI, which is going to lead them to be far more likely to declaring war against you. And if there's a lesson in playing a Warhammer free, is you don't want to be fighting non-stop wars on all of the fronts. So it's a nice benefit in some situations, but as a faction-wide benefit, yeah, it's kind of lackluster. And as for Tretch himself, he does get melee attack during ambushes and when he retreats and fights a battle again. Oh, so his whole idea is like retreat and then fight. So melee attack, basically chance to hit with melee attacks. And he gets Vanguard deployment for all units in his army. So that can be nice. But he's not a really competent melee combatant. People have said, oh, he's hard to kill. Other legendary lords that this game have can be hard to kill. People have said, oh, I'll use them in multiplayer. Multiplayer is a different discussion altogether than this video. Things work very differently there. But you get some benefits to Storm Vermin, charge benefit to Storm Vermin, passive ability, Tretch Raiders for allies in range, okay, if winning melee combat, missile resistance for clan rats and Storm Vermin, campaign movement range, etc. Basically, Tretch's plan is to rely on some Storm Vermin units and clan rats, which can work. But the problem is, this won't necessarily scale very well for an entire campaign. In fact, it scales pretty poorly. You may have a really powerful army, though there are other Skaven lords that can have incredible armies. But if you can't scale, if you can't get faction-wide benefits, and you only have just a really powerful army, then that's not good enough for a campaign. To have a really good campaign in Immortal Empires, you need to have multiple powerful armies. This is an issue that Skaven struggle with in particular, and I'd say Craventail especially is going to struggle with that. He's not the most powerful either. The major benefits are that he gets recruit rank for Storm Vermin, and he gets a powerful army, and he also starts with a really good structure in the Rictus Grey Hull. That's about it. He has no unique mechanics as a legendary lord, as some others do have unique mechanics. He has none of that. And so he is going to be far, far more limited as a legendary lord than many others will be. It's not a miserable campaign, it's a pretty good start, it's a safe start, because Crookback Mountain, you don't have many foes to face. Like, you start in Crookback Mountain, in the desolation of Asgoth, and then you go and take out Emmerich. And after that, you're in a pretty safe, good position. You can deal with the dwarves, you can deal with the greenskins, you can deal with both of them. You can choose your fights. The factions around you don't necessarily hate your guts, so there are some upsides, if you will, to his situation. But there's also a lot of... but the fact is, he's just relatively weak. I would not want to face the endgame scenario playing as Craventail. I think it would be one of the worst situations. Fundamentally, I think it comes down to this. What makes a good legendary lord for the Skaven is someone that will provide faction-wide benefits that will benefit the faction as a whole, especially as a grower faction, as a faction that gets stronger over time. And Craventail just doesn't do that. And Storm Vermin, you might think they're great, they're okay, but they're not rat ogres, they're not monster units, they're not ranged units like Jezzails or Rattling Gunners. They're not Plague Claws. He just benefits melee units that you don't necessarily care about in very large numbers, or at all in a campaign. There are much, much better units that the Skaven do have access to in their campaign. And that's the downside of Craventail. He's focused on some unit types that you don't necessarily care about. The Skaven roster by default, and he was a free legendary lord for Skaven, the Skaven roster was pretty weak by default. It was DLC that made the Skaven a far more viable and stronger race. But obviously Craventail is designed around the default roster, and he's buffing one of the more irrelevant parts of it. If he was buffing artillery, it would be a completely different discussion. At number 5, we have Lord Skrolk, the leader of Clan Pestilin in the campaign. Clan Pestilin has benefits to plagues. They have a right for plagues specifically. You get a plague priest and you can spread a plague to a foreign settlement, which can be incredibly beneficial as you do gain benefits to your faction with plagues. Like these guys just basically inject themselves with plagues and they do get better for it. So they do gain some power from that, and they do get benefits for right cooldowns for the Pestilin scheme, right? So they do get a major cooldown benefit with respect to that. Okay, so there are substantial benefits when it comes to plagues to these guys. But it's not just that. Lord Skrolk, in particular, he gets a major upkeep benefit for Plague Monks, Monk Censors Bearers, Plague Claw Catapults, and Plague Priests. If it was just the Plague Claw Catapults, that would be substantial enough on its own, but Plague Monks, Plague Priests, and Census Bearers, that is incredibly potent for his own army. Those are some really, really good units. Plague Monks are good units. I'd say they're better than Stormborn. Plague Claws are some of the best artillery in the entire game. Like, you see these guys, the Plague Claws landing a hit. They're not particularly accurate, but you see them landing a hit on an enemy unit. It is going to be devastating. Hell Cannon level of devastating. Now, Hell Cannons are generally better because they're far more accurate. But yeah, Plague Claws can do a lot in a particular battle. They are a melee focused faction. All the free legendary lords for the Skaven are basically focused on melee, be it Skrolk, Queek, and Tretch. But I'd say his melee focus is actually good, like Craventail, because getting these Plague Monks, getting a significant power to Plague Monks, significant upkeep benefits, and it's not just that. You can recruit Plague Priests in all provinces with a talent for him, and you get hero capacity and hero recruit rank for Plague Priests and Ashen Sorcerers. So you can just recruit more of them. You also get a recruit rank for Plague Monks and Plague Catapults for his army only, though you can obviously give that to other armies as well. Diplomatic relations to all Skaven. So he's a pretty decent melee combatant. He may not necessarily be as, say, durable as Craventail, but he's certainly going to do a lot more in a battle in terms of damage than Craventail would be able to do. And the fact that he literally starts with 2 Plague Claws is incredibly powerful. It's also the question of start position. Some people say, oh, doesn't he have a hard start position? I'm like, no, he does not. So, okay, he starts in this province over here in the Lost Valley, and he does have a Nurgle faction to the north that's going to be wiped out by Itza in a couple of turns, and then they'll likely go for you, but that's fine. Because by that point, you'll be able to turn around or build an army to hold the initial province. He also has a Skaven faction next to him in Clan Spittle that he can eventually confederate, make deals with. They can be really useful as allies. So his northern border is secure. Like, there's a Nurgle faction here. You start with good relations with them, can get some money from them. They're going to be wiped out pretty quickly. That isn't the problem. But they are going to secure your northern frontier for at least a while, allowing you to focus on the south. Lustria was always considered far worse, in my opinion, than it ever really was in Warhammer 2. I understand a concentration of legendary lords can create problems, but I always feel Lustria was far worse. And in Warhammer 3, it's generally one of the best places to expand because they've removed a lot of the legendary lords. There are still some, like you have Itza, you have the Cult of Sotik. Though the Cult of Sotik also has a Skaven clan that they started war with, a Skaven clan that you can reinforce fairly quickly, for instance here. So I got some agreements, I can march through this territory, take out the Cult of Sotik when they try and assault the city, this is a city, and eventually confederate these rats. Or wipe them out, if I so desire. But yeah, this is within reach for me. So you do have options, then take all of this, maybe have to deal with Oxyatl, but you take all of southern Lustria, and then you can expand to the north, deal with Itza, have a really good plan, and get the plagues going. Benefit from those plagues, gain significant benefits from those plagues when you get them going. You do have a pretty good starting position. You don't have that many enemies, and they're not going to be able to hold up against you, except the dwarves. But the dwarves are a minor faction. This is not like 4x starting here in this particular place in Warhammer 2. So you are in a pretty good position. You are able to expand fairly swiftly, and the Skaven are a faction that do need that expansion, so you can have a very secure territory from the very beginning. You have a relatively safe expansion path, and you do have some benefits to some pretty good units, Plague Claws, even if it's only an upkeep benefit, and you can benefit from plagues as well. He isn't the best, but he's in a really decent position. I wouldn't necessarily want to play him. I think he's one of my least favorite legendary lords actually in the game, but it's hard to argue that he does have a good campaign plan at the moment. At number 4, we have Queek Headtaker. He was one of the default legendary lords, along with Skrolk. Craventail was added in a free DLC, but he was one of the original DLC lords for Warhammer 2, for the Skaven. Queek is a monster in battle. He is one of the strongest melee combatants in the entire game. You can compare this guy not necessarily to Skarbrand's level, though if he went up in a fight against Skarbrand, it would be a close enough thing. That's because he has a skill tree that gives him some fairly substantial benefits. Oh, you can get fear as well. You can get casualty replenishment. You can get quite a lot of power and do an enormous amount of damage. Queek is a wrecking ball. Whenever I used to meet him in a campaign and fight him in battles, and he did start close to certain legendary lords in Warhammer 2 that had to fight him, and he was a genuine nightmare to deal with. Whenever I had to deal with that, it ended up usually being a nightmare situation. But beyond that, what does he get? He gets an upkeep benefit for Storm Vermin and Clan Rat units. Eat your heart out, Craventail. He gets 10 melee attack when fighting against dwarfs and greenskins. You know, all of your neighbors, basically. He gets, all of your immediate neighbors. 10% weapon strength against dwarfs and greenskins. And he can summon more Clan Rats. He also gets a significant upkeep benefit to Storm Vermin and Clan Rat units. This is important early on. Skaven generally start weak. Regardless of the legendary lord you're going to pick as the Skaven, because you're playing a grower faction, you're going to start out pretty weak, and you need tools to be able to overcome your early game weakness. Not every legendary lord has that. Because of that upkeep benefit to Clan Rats in particular, he can mass them. Like, to understand how substantial that is, if I were to move him over here, right, in his initial territory, if you look at the Clan Rats, right, regular Clan Rats, they're less upkeep than Skaven slaves with slings by default. That is incredible, because Clan Rats are obviously going to be significantly better than Skaven slaves. And he is a strong melee combatant, and he can recruit 2 extra chieftains from the very get-go. He does start with a structure that is pretty good, that gives you the ability to recruit Clan Rats and chieftains. You don't have something that could recruit Clan Rats with shields, but it doesn't matter. Besides, you will be able to maintain a full Clan Rat army, and then maybe a Storm Vermin army if you so desire, because Storm Vermin are only 125 upkeep cost for his army. Like, Craventail is supposed to be the guy that focuses on Storm Vermin. He focuses on their ranks. Queek is the guy who can mass them without breaking the bank on your economy. And that is a fairly substantial benefit. He starts the Plague Claw, always nice. It's not quite the 2 as Lord Skrolk, but it doesn't matter, because he also starts with some Storm Vermin. He starts with a Chieftain. He can recruit 2 others. He has probably, in my view, the best early game army of any legendary lord of the Skavens. Like, other Skaven lords might have better armies in the long term, but that early game benefit is quite substantial. Another thing to mention regarding Queek and Craventail, he starts close enough to Craventail that's quite likely you can confederate him and get all the lord benefits that Craventail does have. Sure, you won't have the encourage benefit that Craventail gets for his Storm Vermin, instead, or the recruit ranks, but you don't necessarily need them. Besides, by the way, talking about recruit ranks for Storm Vermin, you can get some benefits for you get 2 recruit rank for Storm Vermin for the Lord's army, and you can always pass these on to other armies. Basically, Queek can get quite a few units very cheaply early on, maintain large armies from the very get-go. They won't be the best armies in the world, but you will certainly be able to swarm your enemies. And also, despite the fact that he starts in the Thunderdome, so to speak, or close enough to the Thunderdome, his starting position is actually relatively safe. Yes, there is Karak-Azul, but they're not necessarily a major issue to deal with. The Orcs certainly aren't a major issue, though it does say a lot about Queek, the AI at the moment, that Queek generally struggles to actually deal with these initial Orcs, considering they don't necessarily have a lot to go for. Now, you might think starting with a minor settlement is a downside, but it's actually a benefit. Get food, get Karak-Azul to level 2 or 3 when you capture it, or maybe more, and then take this entire region, get that to a higher level. He's in a relatively safe position because the factions here are either going to fight each other, like the top knots are going to fight Skarbrand. Skarbrand is not necessarily eager to go to war against you. In fact, you're in a pretty good situation with your relations with Skarbrand, far more so than you are with other factions. So you're safe, you can expand north, deal with Karak-Azul, deal with Emmerich, take this entire territory, take this whole swath of territory. It's basically a similar situation that Craventail has. You're just that much better than he is. Because you have a far more potent lord in terms of combat. You have the ability to mass Storm Vermin for the sake of Queek's army, though I'm not sure you would necessarily want to do that, but it's certainly an option that can work. Or one of the things you can do with Queek is just get a lot of clan rats in his army. He's certainly going to buff them, right? He's going to buff them with high recruit rank, armor, etc. Get all of that for his army, and you have an army that isn't necessarily going to be a doomstack, but it's going to be fairly cheap. And because Queek's own personal combat ability, where he can kill legendary lords in a far better way than many other lords can, you can use that army to take a significant amount of territory, and then get other armies led by other lords that are stacked to the teeth with things like ogres or weapon teams, etc., and just expand. You have a pretty good starting position. Not necessarily on the same level as Lord Skrolk, but you are going to be able to do quite a lot if you're playing Queek, and I would say Queek is substantially better in terms of combat ability than most other legendary lords in the game. And you get some really good items that makes that even better with some Allegiance points benefits. The set bonus isn't necessarily powerful. The items, however, 20 weapon strength when fighting against dwarves, 10 infantry bonus when 10 bonus versus infantry, dwarf gorger, quite a lot to go for when we're talking about Queek. So yeah, if you are playing a Skaven legendary lord, Queek is a solid enough choice. It might seem like a harsh start, but you're surrounded by your immediate enemies are going to be minor factions, and you certainly have all the tools in your arsenal to deal with them. Now at number 3, we start talking about the DLC legendary lords, and there's a reason why all 3 of them, be it Throt, Ikkit, or Snikch, are the highest ranked on this list. Because each of them has unique faction mechanics that elevates them above the other legendary lords, the default legendary lords for the Skaven race. Let's look at Throt. He starts in Hell Pit. It isn't the best start in the world, not because the enemies you're fighting are so fearsome, they're not. Kastalton, Kislev, Prague, all that would be fairly easy to deal with. That isn't the problem. The problem is Skaven, in order to be good and have good provinces that they can keep under control, because they do have a control issue, do really need a provincial capital. And they need minor settlements to go along with it, so they can build minor structures in them. Like, for instance, the platform, or the warrens, or the rubbish pit, or all 3 of them. Like, if you are a Skaven faction, like if you can get all 3 of them in a minor settlement, you will have, and you have a provincial capital, a proper one, you will gain a significant amount of income. Here's the issue that comes with Kislev in particular. The settlements in here are like 2 region or 3 regions in the southern oblast, or the eastern oblast, but they're all minor settlements. There is no provincial capital, so one of the things you're going to lack is this particular structure, which gives you a significant amount of income. And because they're so limited, you won't even be able to keep them under control by default with just structures. You'll need to maintain armies. So the problem Throt has, despite all the benefits he may have as a faction, is that his starting territory, the natural expansion, so to speak, in Kislev, is absolutely terrible. You will have a much better time if you expand to the north, deal with Karaka Drak, deal with Trog, the Troll King, get the Forbidden Citadel, and maybe then move east. Okay, so those are the issues. But what does Throt give? Well, he does have Lord effects of minus 20% upkeep for Wolf Rats, Rat Ogres, Mutant Rat Ogres, basically all the Monstrate units. On top of that, he also gives them a significant amount of armor and gets the ability to summon Rat Ogres in a battle. That is pretty substantial, though of course it is a summon, so it will decay pretty quickly. That's his Lord skills, his default skills. On top of that, he gains more growth juice from battles, income from both battle loot by 10%, casualty replenishment by 10%, gets significant missile resistance, weapon strength, and melee defense for all those monstrous units, and gets hit points, ward saves, cooldown to Beast Pack, and ability of uses for Beast Pack, so he can get Rat Ogres twice in a battle. That is fairly substantial to begin with. It makes his army strong, but that's not really why he's so high on this list. He does gain immune to mountain attrition, and he gets a construction benefit for the structures that would for the chain that constructs those monstrous units. Okay, again, that's not why he's on this list. The reason he's on his list is because of his special legendary lord mechanics. So what does Throt provide? He can make Skaven slaves into incredibly powerful units. How incredibly powerful? He starts with the laboratory. It's going to be level 1. To unlock some of this stuff, it's going to take time, and most of the stuff is going to affect units that are from the growth vat. Not necessarily all of them. And there's some pretty substantial upgrades here when you do use the vats. But for instance here, I'm just going to buy 100 mutagen. What is mutagen? It is your special resource. It can go up to 200 over here. And what you do, from the very start of your campaign, you can use it to buff your units through the roof. So for instance here, if I get melee attack, then I get unit rank. You start unlocking more and more stuff. You start augmenting your units through the roof. And then you get some augments that, will apply random augments. So this Skaven slave unit gets a lot of casualty replenishment, a higher unit rank, stock, armor, melee attack, armor piercing, quite a lot to go for there. Give it frenzy, give him more and more stuff, until they start becoming unstable, of course. That's when it starts kicking in. The instability, right? You can recycle it for quite a lot of growth juice, if you so desire. But keep going, keep unlocking stuff, getting ridiculous and ridiculous and ridiculous. You may get lucky. You may get incredibly lucky. Okay. But you may recycle an individual unit, because this guy, yeah, he's got a lot of instability. What does that instability do? Well, that instability is going to just basically kill him, essentially. Right, so he's going to take extreme damage per second to him. He may be a glass cannon, and this is a Skaven slave, the most basic unit, crap unit you can get. But obviously it doesn't make sense to keep that, so let's get some growth juice. I get actually more growth juice because I have another unit, though they would be in a much better state. Actually, even more growth juice with some of these units. Let's take, not that, I can't recycle that. I can't recycle that either. Let's see what I can recycle. Well, you can only recycle unstable units. Point is, you can recycle unstable units for growth juice. Growth juice goes to a tab. Once you fill this tab to at least 500, you can claim the Grown Vat monsters, which are instant recruitment through a special tab. So for instance, if I cancel the Skaven Slave, I can get one unit of Rat Ogres for free. Now, Rat Ogres are a mid-tier unit. They're pretty good. They have a lot of HP, can do a lot of damage. They are obviously vulnerable to anti-large. You can get things like Hell Pit Abominations from this. You can get Skaven Slaves, basically monstrous units. So you can get Skaven Slaves, Rat Ogres, Wolves, Brood Hunters, and Hell Pit Abominations from these vats. And the way you get this growth juice, beyond recycling units that have instability, you gain growth juice by fighting battles, taking settlements, or raising settlements. Either way, winning battles. That's how you do it. You grow it, you then claim what's in the growth vat, or you let it fill up to, I don't know, I think it's about 1,000, and then you can get some really powerful units, high tier units, like all the way to things like Hell Pit Abominations, which is one of the things that I got there with augmentations. And then you can augment them to a ridiculous level. You have a lot of benefits that you can give these units. You can augment your infantry, you can augment your monstrous units. You have upgrades in the laboratory. The more you claim the vats, the more batches you get. Like at level 1, you're basically going to get Skaven Slaves and Wolf Rats. At level 2, you get Rat Ogres. At level 3, it is things like Hell Pits and Brood Horrors. So there is a lot of power in this faction. And it's actually the closest to the Skaven Swarm that you can imagine, because you have this faction resource that you just gain by winning battles. It doesn't decline, and it just gives you free units that you can instantly recruit. That is incredibly potent. And then you can improve those units, or other units in general, with augmentations, with mutagens, and make them incredibly powerful. And obviously the more you unlock, like for instance, if I put, like you do start getting rare stuff. So you'll have a rare one, Final Evolution, so you're getting a free random ones in Final Evolution. For infantry units, you can get two uncommon ones. Some pretty good stuff that is available if you augment it. So I can get 5 with just 2. 5 for the price of 2, though they are more expensive in terms of mutagens, right? And you can get up to 200 mutagens. I'd say that he should maybe get mutagens easily, but this is the crucial aspect. Mutagens are their own resource. Skaven have some really good top tier units to begin with, but you can take some of the crap tier units, clan rats, Skaven slaves, rats, and wolf rats, and you can make them into powerhouse units that will beat anything in their path. There is an instability factor, which obviously has significant downsides, but you can generally recycle that. Although not necessarily the Skaven slaves, because there is an upgrade that will give you certain benefits in the lab. Like, for instance, if you get Skaven slaves from the vat, you can get 1 to 5 random augments, but you can no longer recycle them. All right, so there are downsides, and you need to play around with that. Ideally, you get a bit of instability. A bit of instability is fine, but you can get really lucky with certain units and gain a significant amount of upgrades. Like, look at this unit. It has, if I look at the lab, this unit has 7 upgrades, and it isn't unstable. It's got minus 15 upkeep, 5% casualty replenishment, a lot of weapon strength. There is an enormous amount of power on top of the regular roster that Skaven do have. I'd say the only thing that's keeping Throt back from being the top tier legendary lord for the Skaven is just his poor positioning at the start. So all Skaven are stronger later game. He especially would be very strong late game. But I would say the fact that you start in such a piss poor position, that isn't ideal for Skaven because of these minor settlements, because you do need provinces with ideally 4 settlements. 4 is the ideal number, and you just don't have that unless you start going east, taking the mountains here, maybe taking the Skull Road. Unless you do that, you're just not going to have an ideal expansion. So it is a slower start, but man, it is incredible. And the real benefit here is you can get really powerful units that are incredibly cheap to recruit otherwise. You can stack monsters, and you can get one of the most powerful armies in the game. It's going to be limited by the mutagen, and how the dice roll goes. But I don't think there's anything quite like it in the rest of the game. So yeah, Throt earns his number 3 spot. He's not a melee combatant like some other guys are, but it doesn't matter. If you can take Skaven slaves and make them incredibly powerful. I mean, the fact that you can get rat ogres and hell pit abominations for free recruitment, and obviously you pay the upkeep, but for free recruitment is an incredible power on its own. The fact they then take those units and make them insanely powerful is on a whole new level. And number 2, it would be Ikkit Claw of Clan Skyraya, or however you pronounce it. Honestly, I do struggle with it. He has generally been considered the baseline to play Skaven, but why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons for it. The first one is that he personally gets a significant upkeep reduction cost for Warplock Jezzails, Rattling Gunners, and Warpfire Throwers. This is your range Doomstack. Jezzails are incredibly powerful sniper units, so they do have an issue with ammunition, and Rattling Gunners are minigunners, more or less, though they do have a short range. If there is any downside to this particular army, is that gunpowder units in Total War Warhammer 3, but especially these units, do struggle with line of sight. They might have a clear line of sight and they can't fire. This is especially bad in sieges, because you might break down a gate and you might have direct line of sight, but they just won't fire through that open gate or through a destroyed wall, which makes sieges unbearable if you are playing Ikkit Claw. So that is a major issue. On top of that, he does start over here in Skaven Blight, surrounded by foes or potential foes, and his expansion plan is not necessarily the best. But none of that fucking matters. For all the issues you're going to have with that, and for all the misery you're going to have in the early game with that, you do have an incredible structure in Skaven Blight. The Warpstone Telescope, which gives you clan rats with spears and shields. Not just clan rats with spears and shields, which are the better units. And at level 3, if you get tier 3, you get Warplock Jezzails, Rattling Gunners, and Warpfire Throwers. So all those units that you can get a significant upkeep benefit to, you can recruit them once you get Skaven Blight to level 3, which you can do pretty quickly. You can even abandon Skaven Blight, take another settlement, occupy that, and then occupy Skaven Blight again, and get to level 3 or even 4 pretty early on in the campaign. Then faction-wide benefits, you do get construction cost benefits to engineering buildings, loyalty for new recruits, so whenever you recruit a lord, you're going to get a loyalty benefit, research rate of 20%, which is pretty nice, so you can unlock all of the research tree. I would recommend you focus on the top. Just one thing to mention for all the Skaven legendary lords, generally focus on the top tree, or the 2 top trees, because you can get campaign movement range, income from post-battle loot, casualty replenishment, etc., etc., etc. This is what you generally want to focus on. There's one legendary lord that does have an issue with this, but I'll get into that in just a moment. But what really elevates Ikkit Claw is none of that. Not the weapon teams, not the upkeep, not Skaven Blight itself, which is an incredibly good settlement that you do have access to from the very start of your campaign. No, it's not any of that. It is the Forbidden Workshop. The Forbidden Workshop takes the scientific units, so to speak. The Doom Flayers, the Doom Whales, the weapon teams, so Warp Grinders, Warpfire Throwers, Jezzails, Rattling Gunners, and gives them buffs. Oh, you want Rattling Gunners to have more ammunition? No problem. You want them to have reload time reduction? No problem. You want them to have more ammunition and weapon strength? All very good. Jezzails, armor piercing, missile damage, missile resistance. Pretty good. Warpfire Throwers, missile strength, all this very, very good stuff. And it goes further. And this is what really sets Ikkit Claw apart from every other Skaven legendary lord. He has nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons. Doom rockets, if you get the enemy clumped up, Doom rockets can wipe out an entire army pretty much. Doesn't matter what rank they are, doesn't matter what level they are. Anything outside of an entire army full of heroes, and if they get clumped up, is going to be completely wiped out. And you can get buffs to these. Oh, you want to have a 25% chance to build an extra Doom rocket when you construct one? Good. You want to do more damage over time? You want to get casualty replenishment after using that? You want to recover warp fuel, which is the currency you use to construct these things? All very good. And there are some incredible benefits. You get some items, some special units by upgrading your workshop. The workshop does require certain challenges to do so. This is what sets Ikkit Claw apart. He doesn't just have the weapon teams, which came with the DLC he's associated with. He makes them significantly better than any other Skaven Legendary Lord. Now, a stack of weapon teams does have its downsides. It's very prone to getting screwed over unless you have good line of sight. Their ammunition is an issue, and once you run out of ammo, you're screwed. However, none of that matters. When you have nuclear weapons in the game, in a medieval fantasy game, and you're using nuclear weapons, it is a completely different ballgame. The one downside is his starting position. It's not quite as bad as Throt. I'd say Throt has a worse situation because the settlements he has are limited, whereas Ikkit Claw can actually expand. He has a fairly safe situation in Stalia if he takes it. He has a pretty good situation in Tylea. He can go south to Araby, as I have done here, take all of this territory, which will be largely safe in a lot of ways, with the exception of some lizardmen coming here to attack it. So he's going to be in a pretty good spot. He has avenues of expansion, a great deal. He can go to Lustria, as I have in this particular expansion. He can go to Lustria, take a lot of this territory, conquer it. Because Lustria, as I've discussed before, Lustria is actually really good for you to expand in. There's multiple Skaven factions, though they've been wiped out by this particular point. Some of them except Clan Spittle. If I open the map, I think Skrolk has been wiped out. He does struggle. The AI with him does struggle. Granted, he is sandwiched between two Lizardmen Legendary Lords, and that's, I think, the reason he does genuinely struggle. He would be fine if you played him. If you played him, you wouldn't necessarily struggle that much. But yeah, Ikkit Claw has a lot to offer, and there's a reason I think he's genuinely the most popular Legendary Lord of the Skaven in the game. Like, if you were to hold a popularity contest, Ikkit Claw would win it hands down. He's actually pretty good in combat as well. He's a hybrid between a caster and a melee lord, which also has some decent range damage as well. He's got some incredible spell damage with the brass orbs that you can upgrade. He has some good spells, and again, he has nuclear weapons. That puts him in number 2 spot. The only thing that keeps him, honestly, from my perspective, the only two things that keep him from taking the number 1 spot from my perspective are this. The fact that weapon teams do have issues with line of sight, with actually just being able to fire. The pathfinding is really annoying with them. Like, you might think, oh, the elevation should be good, they should be able to fire, but they're not able to. That's one thing, and 2, his start position. Outside of that, he's in a really good spot. And finally, in number 1 of the Skaven Legendary Lords in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, we have Deathmaster Snikch of Clan Eshin. He has some downsides. Let's be absolutely clear, but compared to the other factions, they are not necessarily as significant. His recruitment cost for all non-Eshin units is higher. But what are non-Eshin units? What does that mean? Does that mean Skaven slaves or anything like that? Not necessarily. It means things like, if I move to another army here, it means things like Storm Vermin, right? It means things like Storm Vermin that are going to be more expensive to recruit from the very start. Though you can deal with that, and you don't necessarily need those units. Well, Plague Claws do suck, but yeah, just pay more for some Plague Claws and you'll be fine. Clan Eshin has its own roster of units. He gets benefits. Snikch gets benefits for some of that. He gets an extra ambush chance, so he's pretty good at that. Eat your heart out, Craventail. So he's pretty good at ambushing. He is much better at ambushing than Craventail. And he gets benefits with campaign movement range, Strider for the Lord's Army, charge bonus for the Lord Army, upkeep benefit for the Lord Army, hero and Lord recruit rank plus 3. So all that is pretty good when you think about it. And he is extremely deadly in melee. This guy was added in the same DLC that added Malice Darkblade. And you gotta remember, Malice Darkblade, when he transforms into demon, is an incredibly potent melee combatant. Snikch was added as a rival to him, and you can be certain he's more than capable of fighting in melee against him or anyone else. Basically, he and Queek, I'm not exactly certain who's better in melee. I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you that, but I do believe that it would be pretty close in a fight between these two. He gets a leadership bonus with his weapon for Gut Runners, Night Runners, Death Runners, and Ishin Triad units. Those are the Ishin units that I've mentioned before. So, Clan Ishin does start in a minor settlement, but that's not really a problem for Skaven, given the way they occupy settlements. They do start with a minor settlement that does have its own special benefit, in this case upkeep, quite a bit of upkeep, and they specialize in these units: Night Runners, Gutter Runners, Ashen Triads, and Death Runners. That is their specialization. That is where he benefits. If there's any downside with relying on these guys, it's not the combat ability. They're pretty okay in combat, more so in ambushing than siege battles, but they'll do pretty fine in siege battles as well. Minor settlement siege battles, they're pretty deadly. I may not care at all about clan rats, but every time I used to face against Gutter Runners and Night Runners and Death Runners on the campaign, when I was playing Emmerich, especially in Warhammer 2, I would dread coming up against Snikch, because he always had these units, and it was always terrible to have to deal with them. These guys fire while moving. They're basically skirmish infantry, and these are the melee variant. There's also slingers with these guys. Yeah, there's something else, because they can dot, because they can slow down targets that try and chase them, right? So that is annoying. They get melee defense leadership. They get quite a lot of benefits, and they're invisible, right? They do have quite a few things going for them. The slingers also have dodge, who can dodge blades and missile, and they're gonna be pretty good. And those are not even necessarily the best units. You do get all the way to Ashen Triad. So there is a great deal of power in the army. The only downside really to it is the fact that the tree to upgrade these units and the research is down here. But the benefits that you get here are more so focused on sneaking around rather than faction benefits like upkeep cost or casualty replenishment, upkeep cost for Skaven slaves, all that kind of stuff. So there are certainly some downsides over here with going down as opposed to upgrading upside. So you'll have to sacrifice more or less. If you're playing at Clan Ishin, you'll have to make that choice between focusing on your armies or focusing on your campaign improvement. But despite all of that, Clan Ishin is in an extraordinarily good spot. All of the Skaven are in a pretty good spot, all of the DLC lords. So their unique faction mechanic are these contracts. Now, how do these contracts work? Well, you do have certain campaign actions. You can send Snikch to the Night Lord, who will give you, who will unlock schemes. Now, you can then use these schemes for various things. You do need a hero, who I believe needs to be an assassin, if I'm not mistaken. You do need either an assassin hero or a master assassin to be able to undertake these schemes. There's no chance of failing. They will always do it. And you can steal a lot of money, 4,000 from a settlement while reducing its income. Oh, you want to lead the AI dry of its money? You can do so. There's other things as well that you can do. This one especially is incredible. So what will happen here is you do this. You plunge into anarchy, and you basically remove that legendary lord. Even I don't know if that's still how it works, but you can eliminate a legendary lord from the game, or lord from the game, and replace his faction with another one with an action. That is incredibly potent. You can steal money. And then you have clan contracts, which can give you money. I don't have any contracts here, but you have the 4 main clans. No, Clan Rictus does not count. But you have Moors, Mulder, Skaraya, and Pestilin. And you can send out agents to do these contracts. No contracts available. Now, you do have this recruitment cost, but you can reduce it if you get relations, if you get this meter up. It is a special meter. You get this up, you get reputation. You might be able to even confederate these guys. or getting good relations with these guys just by simply doing contracts. They're all rivals with one another, and they're relying on you to do their dirty work. But you can reduce this meter by reduce the cost that you have for all non-nation units. You can reduce it by quite a substantial amount. You may even get a reduction if you get your reputation too exalted. Though you will probably have to decide. So if you want Plague Claw catapults to be cheaper, you're gonna have to do missions for Clan Pestilent. Same with Plague Mugs. And you do also get benefits like melee defense, armor, physical resistance, all that. And here's another benefit to all of this. Like, you already have some powerful actions. You have contracts that give you, like, for instance, the starting ones will give you 500 gold and a couple, and what is it, 20 food, 5 food, whatever. That's unimportant. But I assume the rewards at a higher level will be even better. But here's the side benefit here. As you do missions, your heroes are actually going to, like, for instance, I send a Master Assassin, right? Just do sneaky scouting, and he may gain experience. Or if I do a contract, he may gain experience. That is useful. That's really useful because that means you can level up a bunch of these assassin, both lords and heroes, by just doing these missions, by doing contracts that will pop up for the clans for free, or by using schemes to do special actions, and level up an entire legion of heroes and lords that you aren't even necessarily using in the campaign. You can have those leading armies in armies, and you don't necessarily, and you at the same time, in your backbench, so to speak, you're getting a whole army of lords and heroes that you can then recruit in your armies or create lead new armies at the pretty high level. That is a substantial benefit in its own right, because you can get army leaders, heroes to lead them. It is limited to assassins, of course, but then again, given the way your faction works, you will want assassins leading your armies, because these assassins will benefit the playstyle of Night Runners and Gutter Runners and Death Runners, of course, as well. So that's something. So these schemes do benefit you greatly. And as a result of all of this, I would certainly say that Clan Ishin and Snikch are at the top of the list. He is an incredibly powerful combatant. He can remove legendary lords or lords and general faction leaders from the campaign map, quite literally, if you play him. And crucially, he starts in a really, really good position. Now, his starting province kind of sucks, I admit, but Cafe is a really good place if you want to build an empire, because it's largely safe. Even with all the Cafe and factions arrayed against me by and large, with the exception of the northern provinces, because I bribed them by taking a piece of territory and giving it to them, is a really safe place where you can expand across a great swath of territory without too much opposition, because all the factions that are arrayed against me also have other enemies for them to deal with, other problems for them to deal with, and I certainly can take advantage of that and seize their territory. I mean, I've taken the capital of Cafe by turn 18. It can be that ridiculous when you're playing a campaign, and that means you can expand across the world much easier, much faster than anyone else. And good luck stopping the Skaven tide once it gets going. Because as I've said, they are a grower faction. They're a faction that gets stronger the more you play them, the more you expand. And Clan Ishin, because of its starting position, is very well suited to take that out. If there's any issue, is that just wiping out the orcs that you started to work with can be a bit of an issue. But after that, it's smooth sailing from there. You can certainly take advantage of all the conflicts that are being fought in Cafe, in any campaign. And that's all I had to say. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you next time.